This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. This is Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, and that song is about trust. And a very, very important show because how many of you work with people you don't trust? How many of you have ever, been, what's the scientific term for it? Screwed after you trust somebody. And so today we have a very important guest. We'll be talking about the 10 laws of trust and how important it is today, especially in a world or culture where trust is trampled upon. It is one of the worst. I mean, I've never seen so much lack of trust, and that's amongst people you like and all this. So it's a very important thing. It's going to be about the 10 laws of trust. Any comments there, Kim?
Well, this book is timed so well. Our guest is Joel Peterson, and Joel is the chairman of JetBlue, Stanford business professor, and founder of PE firm Peterson Partners. But right now,
also CEO of Trammell Crow.
Yes,
Kim.
he was
Jeez.
former CEO of Trammell Crow. But this whole book on trust and what is needed, and one thing I love that Joel says, he said, was in low trust cultures, and we've all been there. In low trust cultures, people reach for legal documents. It's all about the legal documents, all about the lawyers, it's all about the contracts. But in the world of trust, you actually cuts down your cost and your time because you can work with people. It's a huge subject worldwide right now.
So once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Our guest is Joel Peterson, and it's a very important subject on trust, but more importantly, how do you build trust in an organization? And, Kim and I we all work in a very litigious society today. And every time I'm driving to work, every bus has nothing. Sue this guy, sue that guy. We have all these ambulance chasers. And so, as some of you may know, is that you get sued from inside your own company. You can't even trust the people you work with. They'll sue you for anything today. So that's the society we live in today. Where before we talk things over and discuss it and all that, now they just have their attorneys on speed dial and they sue you now. So, Joel, welcome to our program.
Welcome, Joel.
Yeah, with that intro.
Who's your attorney? So what motivated you to write the 10 Laws of Trust?
Well, I've been involved in many companies, many boards, and coaching lots of CEOs over the years, and I really realized that trust is the most powerful currency they've got, particularly in a turnaround or in building a great culture, building a great company. But it's also very fragile. It's kind of one-way sticky. If you're building trust, you're laying it down at a conversation at a time, but you can destroy it sort of immediately and quickly, and it's hard to rebuild. And so this is a very precious commodity that we need to restore in our society and in our companies and families and communities.
So if we could, let's get right into it, simply because, this is, you got 10 laws. So let's start with law number 1 and just get into it. You start with personal integrity. What does that mean?
Well, people use that term to mean honesty, but it really is beyond that. Integrity is not having a gap between what you say and what you do, and it's also not having a gap between how you behave in your personal life and how you behave in your public life. People are smart. They pick up on lack of integrity. They understand where there are these gaps, and if you don't trust the leader of an organization to have integrity, it's very hard to build a culture of integrity for the whole company.
That is a great point because, Robert, you and I, we've had our share of betrayals, and I love what you say, Joel. Having been betrayed, I still opt for trust over mistrust, and so do we. But there was one, when you talk about congruency of character, we were just talking about an investing partner we were dealing with in Florida, and the words were good, and the words were all about, we know we're good Christians, we're good religious people, we do the right thing. But then one night we went out to dinner, and they were out of control, obnoxious. People were leaving around them. They were just rude, and we were in shock, and we're like, what is going on here? Because there's such a congruency gap that the integrity went right out the window.
Well, if you watch the difference between how people behave and what they say,
Yes.
it's a huge clue. So, I think you can also watch, which kind of gets to the second law, how people treat others in the organization. So if they treat them without respect, if they're total respecters of persons, in other words, only people with high stature in the organization are treated well, you actually diminish trust, and that's kind of related to having integrity too.
In the Marine Corps, it's called butt kissers.
Yeah.
I went to military school, and the first words they put into our heads is the mission. What's the mission? Which is spiritual. And the motto of the academy was acta non verba, deeds not words.
Mm-hmm.
You're judged upon your actions, not your words. And it just nauseates me personally, coming from 4 years of military school and 6 years of the Marine Corps. Many people think their words don't matter. They'll tell you anything you want to hear, but the actions do not match the words. And it just drives me nuts personally. Not that my actions are perfect, of course, but...
Yeah, nobody's perfect, but fundamentally, the way you build trust is by delivering on promises. It's where what you deliver is what you said you would deliver, and that actually builds trust. And whenever you don't do that, you diminish trust, you destroy trust, and it's really that simple. All these other laws are things that support that, but fundamentally, if you're not delivering on what you promise, you'll never build trust.
Well, it goes as simple as this, because when somebody says, I'll be there at 10 o'clock and 20 minutes later, they're still not there, that's really tough for me. And then because
it's a withdrawal of trust.
Yeah, and I do my best to tell people this. I was a gunship pilot in Vietnam. If I had to be rolling in on this moment, I was rolling in hot. I had to be there on time because another person was counting on me to be there on time. So I have this time paranoia phobia. So when somebody's like a minute late, I get goosebumps because who's going to cover me? Who's going to cover me rolling in behind me? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And
right. Sure.
When I attempt to talk to a civilian who says, yeah, I'm trustworthy, I go, I don't trust anything you said just now. So that's kind of the background I came up in. What's the third one? Empower others.
Can I just say one thing about the respect? Invest in respect, because you say one of the keys to it is listening without an agenda. So you're talking about really, truly being present and listening to the other person, not wanting to impose your point of view.
Well, have you ever listened to somebody where you can tell that they're just waiting until you take a breath so they can get in what it is they want to say?
Exactly.
You don't feel really very respected. You're just being used. You're just a temporary audience, and they have their own agenda. And I think if you ever are with somebody who actually is really listening to capture what it is you're saying without judgment, your trust level goes up.
Yes. Agreed.
And what about people that cut you off when you're speaking halfway through the sentence? Oh, my God.
Same thing, yeah. Well, they're not respecting you. They're not listening. You're not building trust.
No, it says you don't count in my life is what it says.
Right.
That's horrifying. Right. So number 3 is empower others. That's what the thing I'm getting at, Joel, is these are just words, and for most people, everybody has the right words. They just don't act the words. They're just words. Right. They don't actually walk the talk, as we used to say.
Yeah, if you are going to build a high trust organization, you're going to have to cede control to other people. It will actually build the trust level of the organization. It will actually make the organization more powerful if you give up power to others. But it's also dangerous. We don't know exactly how people are going to behave. So you have to do it in increments. And as people deliver on promises, you accord more trust, empower them more, and you build layer upon layer this high trust organization. But you have to empower others.
Let me ask you this. How do you handle somebody who's broken your trust? Because that's, I think, in any organization, theory is wonderful, but in reality, trust is broken on a regular basis, just by mistake or intentionally. How do you rebuild that, or do you rebuild it?
Well, so I kind of divide it into 2 levels. So the one is that somebody just doesn't deliver on what they said they would do. It may be that there was a misunderstanding. It may be that there was an intervening variable. It may be that we just, something happened. And what I say about those is fix them immediately. that is a breach. But if people allow that to fester, it actually can develop into a significant betrayal that you can't overcome. So that kind of breach you fix immediately. You talk about it, you figure out what caused it, and then you commit to a new way of going about things. There are betrayals where people actually lie, cheat, or steal. And I think in those cases, you want to get out of business with people as fast as you can, and you want to move beyond the betrayal. You really want to forgive, not so much for them as for yourself, so you can begin living in the future rather than living in the betrayal.
Right. And number 4 is, thank you for that, measure what you want to achieve.
That's what we're working on right now.
Yeah. Well, it's a funny thing. A lot of people, when I say that to them, they say, well, wait a minute, I thought you were trusting somebody. Well, that doesn't mean trust. You don't just close your eyes and hope for the best. In fact, it really doesn't show much trust unless you say to people, this is how things will be measured. There's a budget, there's a time frame, there are deliverables. I want you to understand exactly what they are so that you can deliver on them. And if that happens, then we can actually build a high-trust relationship out of this event. If not, it's really tough.
So
There'll
what
be
you're saying,
misunderstandings.
by defining the measurement, the goal, the achievement, you'll know whether the person's trustworthy or not trustworthy.
And they will too, and they'll actually feel more trusted by knowing what's being expected. If they don't know what's expected, they're nervous about it. They think they're doing a good job, but they're not sure. They remain cautious. They remain wary. And what you want to do is be so predictable, so transparent, so clear that everybody knows exactly what you're expecting, and trust grows.
Okay,
And that's one of my life lessons is I have trusted without verifying, without measuring, and that's gotten me in all kinds of trouble. So I love this one.
And then
Yeah, I think Ronald Reagan figured that out too, didn't he?
So we're halfway through.
Yes, he did.
Number 5 is create a common dream, and I think that's the most important one because I've hired a number of CEOs and operators, and they're typical civilians. They keep people in silos. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Or the other thing that I've seen is the dream comes down from on high, and it gets framed and put on the wall. And in effect, that creates cynicism. The only way that people share a dream is if they help create it. And that usually means a lot of conversations, and it means refining words and expressions. And once people are sort of behind something, the trust levels go way, way up because we're all working on the same thing. Whereas if it comes from the corner office and is framed on the wall, it actually can diminish trust.
And that's a tough lesson to learn because when I deal with civilians all the time, well, we don't have time. They got jobs to do. Accounting's got accounting to do, and marketing's got so we don't have time to get together. And it just drives me nuts.
And the other thing that happens is oftentimes there is not the mission is the bottom line. The mission is to make money, and everybody's got to make money, but there is no higher mission. What do you say to something like that, Joel? Because I see that a lot.
Yeah. No, it's true. That's never really a very inspiring mission. That I always say that people want to be respected members of a winning team doing something meaningful, and all three have to be present. People work for meaning. Now, they may not initially, but over time, they really look on their life as, is this something that matters? And so I think you really have to, and for it to matter, I think people have to participate in designing what it is we're trying to do. I talk about it as picking which peak to climb and then climbing it together, belaying each other, carrying gear, and summiting together. And it's powerful when you do that.
And I tell you, that's one of the hardest lessons I have. How do you handle somebody who believes in silos? They keep people isolated so they don't talk to each other. I mean, I run to companies all the time that, accounting has no idea what marketing is doing all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Well, usually what happens then is mistrust develops between the silos, and I think it has to be broken down. I think getting people together, sometimes outside of business, getting to know one another personally, but ultimately what you want is everybody to have a line of sight from their job to the summit.
All
to
right,
know how it is what they're doing contributes to that.
So once again, our guest today is Joel Peterson, chairman of JetBlue. He's a Stanford business professor. and founder of P.E. Peterson Partners, and he has formerly served as CEO of that very respected company, Trammell Crow Company, huge commercial real estate developer out of Texas. When we come back, we'll be finding out. So we've gone through 5 out of the 10. When the other 5, 10 laws of trust, and you'll find out how trust made John Deere a Fortune 500 company, and the lack of trust sunk Enron. So when we come back, we'll be talking probably the most important part of business, but also in life, is who do you trust? Have you ever been screwed, per se? Then, if necessary, how do you rebuild it? We'll be right back. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And today we're talking about the two most dangerous words in life, in business, and anything. The words are, trust me. I still remember I was in this gun show, an antique gun show. This guy says, well, you can trust me. I'm an attorney. I left immediately. I mean, anybody who leaves with trust me is a crook as far as I'm concerned. So once again, you can listen to the Rich Dad Radio Show anywhere, anytime on Android or iTunes. And all of our programs are archived at richdadradio.com. We archive them because we don't sell anything. We're just purely educational. And repetition is how we learn best. So if you listen to this program one more time, just go to Rich Dad Radio, deal this thing about trust me, and then your friends, family, especially your business associates should listen to it, and we should discuss this. Because our guest today is Joel Peterson. He's the chairman of JetBlue, Stanford business professor, and founder of Peterson Partners, and formerly CEO of Trammell Crow. And we're discussing his latest book, The 10 Laws of Trust. Very important book. Good thing it's a small book, so everybody can read it. But The 10 Laws of Trust, we've already come through the first 5. And any comments, Kim?
Well, I think this book is, okay, this is a great, your subtitle, Joel, is Building the Bonds That Make a Business Great, which I love. This applies to family. I would love all of our world leaders to read this book because I think trust is broken globally all over the place. And that's a whole another ball of wax that we can talk about at another time. But I think trust is the number one issue right now that needs to be addressed worldwide.
So anyway,
it goes beyond business.
We've come through the first 5. One, start with personal integrity. That's hard. Invest in respect. Well, yeah. Empower others. Yeah, but you'd have to trust them to do that. And measure what you want them to achieve. And then create a common dream. And now we're on number 6. So number 6, Joel, is keep everyone informed. What do you mean by that?
A lot of companies break down because the communication is by rumor. It's at the water cooler. It's people anticipating things and not really knowing. And the only way to build a high-trust organization is with lavish communication. That's before, during, and after events, and it's bad news as well as good news. And something happens when there's transparency. People may not like the news all the time, but they really feel like nothing's being hidden from them. I know at JetBlue, when I was at Trammell Crow, I used to send out a partner's letter every 2 weeks and just tell people everything that I knew that was going on. At JetBlue, we have a member of our senior management team sends out a letter every single week. So that people, and our rule is we don't want to surprise anybody. We don't want anybody to read about us in the newspaper, something that they don't know from our own team. And that builds trust.
And to that point, as we're kind of reinventing our company here, one of the keys that came up when we first sat down with the team here is what do we want? And that was one of the number one things, Joel, was because everybody had kind of been kept in silos, and now it was we want everybody to know, we want everybody involved in every task, we want everybody to know what's happening on all fronts.
Worse than that, the gossip started from the top down.
Well, there was gossip, there was rumors.
Did you read Ray Dalio's book, Principles?
Yeah, well, I haven't read the book, but Ray Dalio was a study mate of mine. He was in my section in business school.
Oh, wow.
Boy, he talks about, he calls it the hard and bitter truth or something like that. And
radical transparency.
Radical transparency, boy. And, if you do that today, you get sued. And that's what we're doing our best to get back to, because it's not the Marine Corps way. One of the rules the Marines had, if I was gossiping about somebody, let's say I was gossiping about Kim, the rule was I had to go tell Kim straight to her face.
Yep.
And that cut it out immediately. Yep. But in organizations, gossip starts from the top down, and they gossip, and it's another way of keeping people divided.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, number 7, embrace, this is what Dahlia was talking, embrace respectful conflict.
Yeah, so the key word there is respectful. I think a lot of people shy away from conflict. They want to be loved more than respected.
Yes.
And really what you want is pushback. I often assign people to make the counter case to whatever we're planning on doing. I want to hear the best arguments for the other side of things. And I think as long as it's respectful, conflict fleshes out the best ideas. And so I think you want to have conflict. If you don't, you get a bunch of yes men and women, and you don't get it's actually the person who wins the argument, not the idea.
Yeah, you say
so. This idea, the best idea wins.
That's what I like. What you say. Make sure the best idea wins, not the most powerful person.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that.
And number 8 is show humility.
Yeah, which is a surprising one to a bunch of people who think that CEOs are sort of all-knowing, all-powerful, giving directives from the corner office, et cetera. And I find it's just the opposite. If the CEO or the leader of a team will say, I don't know everything, I'll find out. And if we make a mistake, we'll change it, I'll admit it. And if there are good things that happen, they reflect credit and they absorb blame. And so from what you've learned in the military, Robert, that should be a fairly familiar notion to you.
It's, that word respect, it's a very powerful word, because if you don't respect somebody, it comes back at you so fast. It's amazing.
Yeah. And one thing you mentioned, Joel, in your book is the company Enron. And I don't guess there was a lot of humility at Enron. What happened?
No, the hubris was enormous. Jeff Skilling, I think, at one point in time said, "I am Enron."
Oh my gosh.
And that's the opposite of sort of team building and culture health.
Well, there was two companies.
I trust culture health.
There was 2 companies at that exact era, WorldCom and Enron. The other guy was Dennis Kozlowski of WorldCom. Man, he was an arrogant SOB.
That was actually Tyco.
Oh, Tyco.
Kozlowski was Tyco.
Oh, I
Bernie Ebbers was WorldCom.
Oh, okay.
Bernie
Good.
Ebbers,
My
right.
apologies.
So those are
But they were all colossal egos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not organizations built on trust. Just the opposite,
Not
yes?
built on trust at all.
It was
built on fear.
It was a lot of show. Do you know what I mean? I guess it was one of those guys. I guess Kozlowski. He had these huge toga parties. Jeez. I said, how come I'm not invited?
Yeah.
It was all ego. Anyway, it's good. And number 9, this is one of my favorite words, win-win.
Well, I think this one starts out with the notion that there are negotiations going on all the time. In most conversations, there's a bit of a give-get.
Right.
Where you're looking for something, the other party's looking for something. That's why you're talking with each other. So I think the more you see conversations as a form of negotiation, a low-risk form of negotiations, and you try then to conduct your negotiations as a conversation, and where you're seeking for fairness, where the win is that we've come to something that we can both live with, that's a durable agreement, that is win-win. What happens then is your negotiations become serial, not episodic. In other words, you run into the same people over and over, you do multiple deals with them, and you're actually building a high-trust ecosystem beyond your own organization.
Well, the reason I'm laughing is, when that book, In Search of Excellence, came out and all this stuff, I forget who the author was, but everybody started using this term win-win. And so finally we were dealing with this guy who had no humility. His ego was so big he couldn't see it. And so finally he says, when you say win-win, let me ask you this question. So he goes to the blackboard and he puts one win like 3 feet high and the other win 1 inch high. Says, is this your idea of win-win? That's why I laugh when somebody says win-win.
Well,
the picture of the blackboard comes back,
And people use some of these words as cliches, and it all goes back to what you started with. Start with personal integrity and do what you say you're going to do. It really.
Well, and I think the notion here is start solving for fairness. Come out with a deal that will be durable over time, you can both live with. If you come up with a deal where you've crushed the other party, somehow the wheels will come off over time. It will only last as long as the power dynamic is in your favor. I once had a partner who looked at a 3-inch thick contract, and he said, you know what? There's something in it for me. And he's really right. Anything that's that long, there's a way to fight. And I think fighting is one of the low trust responses to circumstances. I think if you're going back to the legal documents all the time, you probably have not created a win-win agreement.
So would you say, Joel, that this society is so litigious and seems to be getting more and more that way? Is that how do we combat that?
Well, I think it is because we've developed low trust. I think social media has contributed to that. I think our political environment has contributed to that. And so people get stressed out, and they take these extreme positions. They don't listen to each other. They really violate the 10 laws of trust. And so the default position is to go to fighting, and we get gladiators in the form of lawyers who do the fighting for us, and that obviously diminishes trust, and it becomes this negative feedback loop, this cycle that is quite damaging. I think you have to intervene and break it, and then start building on trust.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 10 is
Thank you, Joel.
Number 10 is the hardest of all of them, in my opinion. Fix breaches immediately. What does that mean to you, Joe?
So we've talked a little bit about this, but I think it is on these minor breaches where people have just disappointed in not delivering what we thought they'd deliver. Figure out why. There may be a good reason, but don't let it fester. Make sure that you address it and fix it and move on. There are the more dangerous ones that are really fundamental breaches, and I think the answer to that is a little bit like Cortez when he landed at Veracruz and burned the ships so people couldn't go back to them. People who go back to betrayals are really like folks who go back to burning ships. They're going to get burned. You're not living your life forward. You have to forgive and move on. But you have to move on too. You can't stay in business with people that have betrayed you that way.
Okay, so this is the most important part. Without disclosing names or companies, can you tell about one of the toughest implementations or living the 10 laws you've ever personally had to go through?
Well, I went through litigation one time, and I had a very wise counselor who told me, because I wanted to prove that I was right, and so I just wanted to make my case, and she said, the best way to do that is have a great life. Just live a great life. Move forward. And she was so dead on. It reminds me of a funny joke about the guy who survived the Johnstown flood in Pennsylvania in 1906 or whenever it was.
Was it the dam breaking?
Yeah, the dam breaking.
Right.
And went to heaven, and St. Peter said, you've lived a good life. You can have any one thing that you'd like to do. And he said, you know what? I'd like to have you assemble all the hosts of heaven so that I can tell how I survived the Johnstown flood. And Peter said, well, that'd be fine, but you must remember Noah will be in the audience.
Where was that attorney when we needed her? We've been through those litigations, Joel, and oh my goodness.
Anyway, the question is how if you're going to fix the breach, it's easy to walk away. But I think the toughest part is going back to embrace the respectful conflict, because it's very easy to run, because that's what I've done. I've just avoided it, and it just got worse. So how do you handle that? I mean, it's not easy. It's nice in theory, not in reality.
Well, yeah, no, I think you have to catch it early and be talking about it and not let them get big. The problems that I've had in my life are when I've allowed them to get out of control. And, one of the things I realized that's helped me almost as much as anything is the notion that I have joint ventured my problems. I have contributed. At first it was all somebody else's fault. If there was a betrayal, it was all they had betrayed me.
Right.
Whereas in point of fact, I've found that it could be that I wasn't perfectly clear, that my expectations weren't right. And once you have the notion that I joint ventured it, let me say one other thing here that might help with this new version of the book, and that is that HarperCollins bought American Management Association, who had published the first edition of the book, and they said, we'd like to do another one because we think this is a really topical issue, but we need to have it expanded by 30%. Tell us what are the two things that people ask you when you talk about this book. And I said, well, the first one is they say, I don't know what the trust level is in my organization. How can I know? You get up high in an organization and people stop telling you the truth. Mm-hmm. So the first thing we did is we added a diagnostic tool, and I worked with Franklin Covey and came up with these 10 questions where you can basically say, I have a low, medium, or high trust organization to start with. That's the first thing. The second was, how do I deal with betrayal? How do I overcome it? So there's more on the notion of betrayal. If you don't trust, you'll never be betrayed. If you trust, you will be betrayed. And if you don't trust, you'll never be betrayed. The problem is, if you never trust, you'll have a very small life and a very unhappy one.
Right.
So you've got to trust, and you've got to do it in a smart way.
Which brings up, the 10 laws of trust. You have trust level by organization, and it goes from force, fear, reward, duty, and love. Anything you want to say about that? Because different organizations thrive on different levels of trust.
Yeah, lots of fear-based organizations.
Well, most businesses are driven by fear and reward. That's really kind of how most people organize their companies. You'll notice that you've mentioned the military company. The military is built around a sense of duty, and that's a higher level motivation. People will do things. They'll trust more. They'll take more risks in that kind of thing. But love is the most powerful force of all. If you can build an organization where people really have this sense of meaning, they're committed to it, they're committed to each other, trust levels tend to thrive in that. So I think there is a hierarchy of motivations, and I think the more that you can sort of get away from fear and reward and into the categories of duty and love, the more likely you are to build a high trust organization.
Amen, 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 Joel. Fantastic. Thank you for saying that. I love what you say. Trust is a leap of faith rooted in optimism, because if all the trust is broken, all the optimism is gone, and it's just control and acrimony, right, Kim?
Oh, absolutely. And it goes back to, having, as you said, having been betrayed, Joel, I still opt for trust over mistrust. And so I also, and Robert also, we opt to be trusting people, but now it's trust and verify, trust and pay attention, trust and really put your practices into...
And measure.
Put your principles into practice and measure, yes. Yep.
There's
smart trust.
Yes, smart trust. That's a good way to say it.
There's that TV show, Marcus Maloney, the prophet, and he had a TV show. All the times he got screwed by the guys he gave money to, and the guy asked him, he says, "Are you going to change anything?" He says, "No, I would rather trust people, and I'll just keep going." Yeah. Because once you lose that faith in your fellow human being, I think you're finished too.
Yeah. So, just sit in a dark room.
Right. Is that why I'm in the dark room? So Joel Peterson, his book is The 10 Laws of Trust. Fantastic. I please recommend, if you have a friend, family, or a business especially, it should be required reading and discussion, because it is one of the most precious parts of being a human being is trust.
Yes. And Joel's website is petersonpartners.com, petersonpartners.com.
So final words, Joel, anything you want to say to the public out there?
Well, I think the hopeful thing is that you can, by being intentional, build a high-trust life, and it really becomes the operating system of a life well lived.
So thank you very much.
Well said.
Everybody, please go get his book, The 10 Laws of Trust. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you very much.
All the best.
Good to talk.
Take care. And we'll come back and go with the most popular part of our program, where it's Ask Robert, where you get to ask me your questions. We'll be right back with Ask Robert. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. You can listen to the Rich Dad Radio program anytime, anywhere on Android or iTunes. And all of our programs are archived at richdadradio.com. We archive them for one reason, so you can listen to this program again, because repetition is how we learn. And if you find it valuable or interesting the second time around, ask friends, family, or business associates, especially, to listen to this program and discuss it, because this is the right thing to do, or an answer will solve your problems. None of these are really answers. They're just processes. So again, I want to thank Joel Peterson, chairman of JetBlue, Stanford business professor, founder of PE, Peterson Partners, and formerly CEO of Trammell Crow, one of the largest private commercial real estate development firm at that time. So we're going to go into the Ask Robert part, and you can submit your questions to AskRobert@RichDadRadio.com. What's the first question, Melissa?
Our first question today comes from Clay in St. Louis. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Says, Robert and Kim, I'm a long-time listener and love the show. My question is, my business partner of 5 years now wants me to consider hiring a relative of his to work in our accounting department. Our business is growing and we are on a good path. I don't doubt the person is capable. However, I'm not comfortable having one of his relatives controlling our books. I want to keep the peace, but I'm not sure how to approach the issue with my business partner. What's your advice?
It sounds like you have a problem with your business partner to me. I mean, if you can't trust your business partner to make a sound recommendation, at that point, you may have a conversation with your business partner. I don't think it has anything to do with his relative. Any comments, Kim?
Well, it's tricky. I mean, it is about trust, and that's why it fits in right today with the 10 Laws of Trust by Joel Peterson. It's sticky. Relatives in business. I don't recommend it. It's just my opinion. I'm not saying do it or not do it, but it can just get messy. It can get messy.
But why does he not trust his partner? Because everything we've done is we've gotten a lot of problems with. We've had business relationships with partners, husbands and wives, and things that's worked, and sometimes it doesn't work. So it sounds like the issues with his partner right now. What is his partner like? So that might be where the discussion starts, and then the next thing is exactly as Kim says. What's the next level below that, and is the person competent? Because if the guy can't fire his own. Like Kim even hired her own mother at one time, which was.
I did. She was great, and we had to.
I tried to fire her, but Kim wouldn't let me.
It was great. We hired her. We were in Portland, Oregon. She kind of ran the office for us, and she loved it. It gave her purpose. And then when we moved to Phoenix, we had to move the company to Phoenix, and it was really hard to fire your mom. It was hard to do.
So as a comedian says, he's a really good guy. Kim and I were in Honolulu, and he was up on stage as an Aussie guy. He says, why do I want to go to heaven? He says, my relatives are there. I can't stand them for 3 days. How am I going to take eternity with my relatives?
It's
those kinds of questions that are real. And I think that's what I think Joel Peter is saying. You better get real pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I think the discussion you're talking about, Robert, is if everything's going well, no problem. But if something isn't going well, this partner has to live with this person and the family. So that's the discussion, I think, when you're talking about trust, is what happens if something goes wrong.
Yeah, and I've worked with my brother. He's been the best.
Yeah.
He's really, really good man, good person. So it all depends. There's not an answer. And I think that's one of the problems with, it's like Rich Dad, Poor Dad made the New York Times this weekend after 20-something years. And the guy says, well, the only problem, the journalist from the New York Times says, the only problem is Robert didn't tell me what to do with my money. And I think that's what people are looking for. Just tell me how to handle this situation with my mother, my brother. I don't know how to handle this. Your brother, your partner. You got to handle it. And I think that's why Joel Peterson's book, The 10 Laws of Trust, very important book because there are no answers. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Corey in Hong Kong. Favorite book, Cashflow Quadrant. Hi, Robert. Thank you for writing Fake. I really enjoyed reading it. My question is, could you please tell me how you would manage your emotions when very bad things happen while still continuing to find opportunities at the same time? I think I must be doing it wrong because I feel exhausted.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is what's the exhaustion about? Are you stuffing your emotions, or are you letting go of your emotions? And you're asking the wrong guy because I don't do well at emotions. So that's why Kim is really the person that's more even keeled in all this because I am a Marine, and I'll just say what I kind of like Trump. I'll say what I want to say at that moment, and a lot of times people can't handle the jet blast. So I'm not a good person to ask that question. I think the better person is Kim, is how she handles it and deals with more equanimity with different people when they're screwing up or screwing you. Comments, Kim?
Well, you've got to have the real conversations, but I think more importantly, what you and I do, Robert, is when we have bad things, as of course as very bad things happen, we always look for what's the lesson, number one, and something good is going to come out of this. We always say out of this something good will come out of it. So we don't get drawn into all the drama of the bad thing and dwell in it and
well, if you got two
feel
emotions,
sorry for ourselves. Yeah.
If you have two emotions firing, you're finished.
Yeah. But we always, even in the darkest times, we're like, something good is going to come out of this. And what's the lesson? What didn't we see? What didn't we know?
And that's when Kim fired me.
But I think if you just approach it that way, because we always look at every bad thing isn't negative. Every bad thing isn't bad if you can find the lesson in it and learn from it and turn it into something positive.
But that's why this book, 10 Laws of Trust, is important, because it says, you've got to show humility, embrace respectful conflict, keep everybody informed, fix breaches immediately, because a lot of times we let things build, and that's what I do. I let it build, and my temper builds, and it builds, and it builds, and it builds. And then Mount Vesuvius goes off and lawsuits start.
Yep.
Is that my MO, Kim?
That's oftentimes your MO. And one of the biggest things is that keep everybody informed. As long as we're in communication with everybody, I think that helps diminish all these upsets and these lawsuits and things like that.
They don't.
Sometimes it's hard to confront people on
So I would
things you don't
suggest buying this book,
Yep.
finding a partner, somebody you trust, husband, wife, or friend, and just take each of the 10 laws and discuss it. Then next week discuss the next law, and your understanding of what Joel Peterson is saying. I think the lessons are fabulous. The laws are fabulous. But if you don't use them, they don't mean
put
nothing.
them into practice. Yep.
And I think Joel Peterson comes with tremendous depth and experience of it. So be respectful to Joel. Buy the book, sit down with a friend or business partner or somebody you respect, and discuss each law slowly, because it does take time to absorb these types of skill sets. You don't just read it and forget it. I think that's what most people do. So thank you for the question. I want to thank Joel Peterson for his book, The 10 Laws of Trust. Thank you for listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show. You can submit your questions to Ask Robert at Rich Dad Radio. So thank you for listening to our program.